Hi. Welcome to the lecture on Chapter 3. All the PowerPoint slides in this lecture will be taken from MindTap. So if you're looking for the supporting information for this, that's where you're going to find it. So this week we're going to look at basically a couple of different ways projects are done today. We'll look at a little bit of agile development near the end of the chapter, and the beginning is kind of more of the standard processes that are done in most major projects. So we'll look at basically what's called 5 project management process groups, and basically process group is just phases of a project. So most projects have all of these same processes that go in, may just do it and execute them slightly different. We're going to look at how these process groups and the knowledge areas kind of relate. We'll look at the development of how organizations develop information technology methodologies to meet their needs. Even though there are some standards out there, each company has the right to come up with a process that works best for their product that they're trying to develop. And then we'll look at a couple of case studies and how this stuff works. And then, again, look at another case study in agile development. And then the author's website has some templates for creating some of these different process groups. I think there should be a link in the resource section of this chapter in Moodle that points in that direction. So, as we know, project management, at least as far as the PMI organization is concerned, there are 10 knowledge areas: integration, scope, schedule, cost, quality, resource, communications, risk management, procurement, stakeholder management. Those are the 10 knowledge areas. But in those knowledge areas, there are process groups that can be tailored to meet individual project needs and then increase its chance of success. And these are initiating a project, planning a project, executing, monitoring, and controlling, and closing. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, I guess monitoring and controlling is actually grouped into one, so that's where you get the 5. I read 6 words, so. So, let's look at the different process groups. Now, a process is just a series of actions that directed towards a particular result. And really all project management is a ton of processes that are all related to getting a project done. Now, when I take all these processes and I kind of group them together, there are several processes to initiate a project, planning a project, executing it, monitoring and controlling it, and, closing processes when everything is done. Now, the percentage of time that's used in each of these processes varies. As you can tell, that closing, monitoring, and initiating are probably the low runners as far as overall time. Most of the time is going to be spent executing your project. But if you notice this, the chart that the author's got here is the more time you spent planning, the better the execution goes. So sometimes it's easy to want to rush in and do something, but sometimes just taking a step back, planning it out, making sure you know what you're getting into, and lay out a course, and then work that plan, executing the project becomes so much easier. So let's look at a couple of things that went wrong. Philip Pell, professional project manager, commented in the IRS needed to involve project management process. Pure and simple, good methodology-centric, predictable, and repeatable project management is the single greatest factor in the success, or in this case, failure of any project. So even the IRS has trouble implementing project, or at least following a process. The IRS continued to have serious problems in managing its aging IT infrastructure and the lack of planning. In the what went wrong section in the textbook, the author goes into great detail as to when the IRS tried to roll out a new software project, how many problems they had in managing their process. Now, if you look at what technology and the media goes into, let's take a look at an IT problem. No matter what you're doing, whether it's making a movie or writing a book, producing a book, creating a widget, the project management still comes the same. So the process of involving making movies includes screenwriting, producing, acting, directing, editing, but all of those relate to our process group. The screenwriting ends up being the initiating. Producing means that's what I'm planning. Acting, directing is the execution of the project. Editing is the monitoring, controlling. And then releasing the movie to the theaters is the closing. So when you're watching a DVD, you can kind of see where these things come into play. So, now, these process groups do map to the knowledge areas, and there are several main activities that you can do this, but there's a table 3.1 that shows the big picture representation about the different 49 different project management activities and which process group they belong to. So take a look at table 3.1 and you'll be fine. Now, many organizations develop their own IT projects because sometimes developing a methodology based on the size of the project, based on the complexity of the project you're trying to develop, you don't maybe need to do everything. But a methodology just says, hey, how things should be done, and a standard just says what should be done. So just because I've got these processes, these process groups, I just got to make sure I look at each one of those and decide, okay, for my particular project, which of these do I want to execute on and which ones don't I? Now, some of the different project methodology, projects in controlled environments, Prince2, Agile, Rational Unified Process, RUP, or Six Sigma. All of these are methodologies, and really, I've only worked with Six Sigma and Agile. The other two haven't had the benefit of using, but basically they are just different things that include the 5 different process groups. Now, this applies globally. In 2018, you get a management survey. Its Pulse and Profession is 47% of the projects completed in an organization in the past year. 23% used Agile, 23% used hybrid or predictive analysis, Agile, and 7% used other. So as you can tell, 47, actually I'll look at it and see, I see 46 plus 7. That means I've got 53% of the people that are out there using something other than a predictive approach. And a predictive approach, we'll go into a whole lot of detail, is just saying, I've got locked milestones and going in. I've got to make sure things are done. Now, in 2017, the survey was conducted and found 94% of the people that practice Agile development, 60% of the teams are not yet practicing it. So even though the company thought they were, not all, the teams themselves didn't think they were practicing it. So it's setting up the processes, making sure the expectations are known, and making sure that people know what their methods and processes they're supposed to be following is very important. Now, sometimes things do go right. Now, organizations that excel in project management complete 89% of their projects successfully. So this is like, if I excel in project management, 89% of the projects complete successfully. To, if I don't do project management well, only 30% of the projects have good results. Now, is there a cost to that? Yeah. Poor project performance cost $109 million from every $1 billion. So that's over 10% of your poor project performance that it costs if you don't have good project management. If I look at a case study, let's look at JWD. It's in the textbook. It's a predictive approach. Now, in that case study, it's an example of what was involved in all the different phases. And you can download the templates that was used from the companion website. Now, I think I posted a link for the author's website. You should be able to go in the resource section and find this case study's processes. Now, this case study provides a big picture, and then as the books go on, we're going to go into detail in each of the knowledge areas. So you may want to at least pull down the information on this just so you have the information for future chapters that we go through, the knowledge areas we go through. Now, project initiation and initiation phase. Now, this includes recognizing and starting a new project. You want to make sure you're building the right project for the right reason. I want to make sure there's some strategic planning should serve as this basic foundation. There's a reason I'm doing this project. I'm not just doing it because I woke up on Monday and decided, hey, I'm going to start a project. Somebody has, and more than likely it's a CEO, a boss, a product manager that says, hey, we need to start a new project. We just sold a machine to a customer that we need to build. It's never been done before. So I need to express what the vision is, what the purpose, the mission, what goals, what do I need to have this thing done by? What's the objectives of this mission? This machine is supposed to work 20 boards a minute laterally versus linearly, whatever the case may be. And then what kind of strategies? I mean, all this stuff is things that the sales guys, the vice presidents, the executives, the the product manager, all try to make sure they understand what needs to be done, and it all provides a basis for planning the IT part of the project. Now, these pre-initiation phases, it's good practice to lay the groundwork before a project initially starts. Usually it's your senior management team. You know, they determine the scope, the time, how much money they're going to give you. They'll probably identify if the project's big enough, who's going to sponsor this, who's going to be the project manager. They probably will build a business case to say, okay, I got to sell 1,000 of these widgets to turn a profit if I do it in a certain amount of time. I'll meet with the project manager to review process and expectations. Who are the key stakeholders that need to be informed and kept in the loop? Should I divide the project into a bunch of smaller projects? You know, once the project manager sees it and says, ooh, this is pretty big, and maybe we need to break it up into smaller projects, reporting back into a larger project. But all this stuff is it's the first thing that's done between the project managers, the product managers, senior vice presidents, laying all of this foundation. Now, just to give you an idea, you can tell that in this initiating phase, there are knowledge areas that are applied. One, you get project integration and stakeholder management. Both of those are used in this, and it even says, okay, what types of things do I need? You know, creating a project charter, a stakeholder register, making sure that we understand how our changes to the project are going to be done, what kind of project plan updates are going to be, what kind of document updates are they going to be. So you can see that even this initiation phase, it does fall into two of the knowledge areas that we're going to get into as this text goes on. Now, one of the things is the stakeholder register. I got to make sure I know who's on the team, who's got a stake in this action, who's key in this, whether it's, in this case, you're seeing CEO, project management director, whether the customer stakeholder is internal, external to the project, and then how do I get a hold of them? Whether it's email, phone number, whatever the case may be. So you make sure that we all know what happens. I got to make sure that because of these stakeholders, I got to make sure I understand who's got interest and who's got some influence. Some people may have a lot of interest, but low level of influence. Some have high level of interest and high level of influence. So guess what? I'm going to make sure that Joe Fleming, because of the influence, I got to make sure he's kept in the loop. Now, Louise here, she's got a low level of interest, but she's got a high level of influence. So even though she's got a lot of stuff going on, she still has a lot of impact on this project, and it may help her in her career or the company and its business to make sure that things are taken care of and done right. So even though she doesn't have the time, she may be a resource you want to tap into to make sure that the influence that you can get the project done successfully. Now, another phase is here, I got to make sure I draft a project charter. What is this project for? And then the last thing in this thing is hold a kickoff meeting. You want to hold a kickoff meeting with all the stakeholders so they can meet each other if they don't know each other. They maybe meet with the customer, talk about the plans of what are the goals for the project, what are some of the future plans, budgets, so that as a team, everybody sees what this project is and put names to places. Here's just an example of a potential agenda at a kickoff meeting. Basically, it's introductions, review the project background. Why are we doing this? Maybe review some of the project documents, the business case, the charter, so on and so forth. So just things there. And as with any meeting, you're creating this action item register. What's the item that needs to be done? Who is it given to? And when is it due by? It's key for every project manager to keep track of this because it's very easy for people to get busy and not do what they're expected to do. Now, the next process group is the project planning. Now, the main purpose of this is just to guide the execution. Now, Table 3.7 shows you all the knowledge areas including that. I don't know if I can't scroll back. Nope, they didn't put it in. So take a look at the table. Table 3.7 identifies all the knowledge areas used in this process area. Now, some of the key outputs, at least for the JWD project, was a team contract, a project scope statement, work breakdown structure. One of the assignments you can do is how do I identify the tasks that need to be done and the dependencies between the tasks. Put together a project schedule, forming a Gantt chart. You don't know what that is yet, but it's basically a dependency chart and what resources. So as time is reported to a particular activity, if it starts slipping past states, it has an impact on future activities. List of prioritized risks. So there are a lot of activities that go on to make sure we have the plan laid out before we do any starting thing. Here's an example of the Gantt chart. And it basically says initiating planning phase. And it goes the entire duration of the project. Well, the planning doesn't, but the execution does. But you can kind of see the 5 phase process groups. Initiating, really small up front. Planning, a little bit longer. Executing is definitely the longest phase. And you can see all the different activities they're doing. And monitoring and controlling takes place just about from the start of the project, from the initiating phase all the way to the closing. Yeah, usually I like to control that all the way to the end, and then the closing section. So you see that interrelationship. Now, one of the things you want to make sure you do is identify the risks. Because if you don't have all the risks on the table, it's easy to make some assumptions and not do things correctly. Whether it's lack of inputs from internal or external clients, a new system, something's never been done before, not enough money, international customers, whatever the case may be, you need to make sure as a project team in this planning, project planning phase is to make sure that everybody understands what's the risks involved. Now you get to the project execution. Now the project execution, this is where the most of your resources are going to be. You spend most of the time. You've seen that in probably. There is a relationship of knowledge areas, executing processes. A milestone report definitely can help. And a milestone is just there's no duration of activities, but it says, hey, I've got to have all the software written by September 15th. I've got to have it tested by October 15th. I have to have it integrated by November 15th. And those are certain milestones and maybe even a handoff chart that says, hey, this is what happens. Now, some of the best practices is take a look at the project, PMI's Project of the Year Award. The website, PMI website has Project of the Year, and every year they identify a project that has followed PMI's best practices. Here's just a couple, of projects that the author felt mentioning. Now we get to project monitoring and controlling. This involves a process toward project objectives. So I'm going to monitor it. I'm going to take care of everything. I'm going to measure the progress. So we're executing the process, and we said there are certain activities need to be done, targets report, so much money to be spent, so many hours to be spent on it. And this is where I'm going to monitor how that progress is going. And then if things start going against the plan, I may have to do some controlling and adjust the plan. Now, project closing, when all the execution is done, it basically says, hey, I'm going to get stakeholder and customer acceptance that we're delivering what we said we're going to do. And there's several different project, outputs of this. Could be project files, lessons learned, final reports, budget item, final closeout budgets. But it just basically says, okay, folks, we think we're done. Let's review with everybody. Did we deliver on what we said we're going to deliver? And then if you look at a case study, this AMJ consulting management customer did an agile approach. Now, an agile team typically uses several iterations or deliveries of software instead of waiting to the end. Your standard project you saw, it's like, okay, I'm doing a bunch of activities, and at the end, I'm delivering you something. Well, agile development seems I'm going to deliver something maybe every 2 weeks or 4 weeks. I'm going to give you a working product. It may not have all the bells and whistles of the final project, but at least as far as what was agreed to for these 2 weeks or a month stint, does it do everything we want it to? Now, there's a couple of roles, that take place. One is a product owner, the person responsible for the business side of things. There's the Scrum Master. He's the person who ensures that the team is productive. A Scrum team or a development team is usually a cross-functional team, 5 to 9 people, and handles all aspects of the team. And what they do is in a 2 to 4 week sprint, they do the work that was laid out. Now, an artifact is just a useful object created, so a program, a screen developed, an icon developed, whatever the case may be. Now, this is things that are created by the people. So there's some things for the project management process there's a product backlog. All the features that have business value. So in the initiation phase, we came up with a list of features that this product needs to have. a sprint backlog. It says, hey, these are the highest priority items that we want to complete in this 2 to 4 week sprint that we're going to develop. And this burn down chart, it shows the accumulated work remaining on the sprint on a day-to-day basis. So we at least see in this 2 to 4 week sprint how we're progressing day by day. Now, there are certain ceremonies. You got a planning session, a daily scrum. That's a short meeting with the development team just to share progress and challenges. Sprint reviews, meeting in which teams demonstrate what was completed during the sprint. And sprint retrospectives just says, I just look for ways to improve for future sprints that we're going to do. This diagram shows you all those different aspects here. You've got the full product backlog that the product owner creates. This whole list gets, since the sprint is a 2 to 4 week list, I'm going to take which of these items do we think are most important and put them in the next development. So I've got a sprint that's 2 to 4 weeks. Daily, the development team is meeting to monitor and control what's going on. Once I get through this sprint cycle, I have a potentially shippable product. Now, granted, this product may not have all the bells and whistles that the product manager has, but it is a useful product with the features that were identified in the sprint going on. Then you have a review, so you kind of close this whole thing. And then what you do, it's like, okay, I still got product, items on my product backlog. I go back and then go through the same process over and over again until I've gotten through the whole product list. Agile has a lot of good things. Now, if you look at the different activities in the process groups, you've got the initiating, determine the rows, decide how many sprints they're going to do, planning, you're going to create the product backlog, create the sprint backlog, create a release backlog, all of these things come into play. And then, of course, you got to execute on this. Now, main difference between pre-initiation in this case and the first case, determining the roles and deciding what functionality would be delivered as part of each release, not just for the project at the beginning. So for every single release, I'm going to do this because maybe I'll have different players in as this features gets developed. How many sprints are going to be required to complete a release, and how many releases for the software to deliver. So those are probably more of the pre-release stuff we're going to decide. Now, the planning side, because Scrum implies team members work as a self-directed group, the Scrum Master team charter is really not necessary. Descriptions of work identified by the sprint and the backlog. So who I have in the project, depends on what's being done. Now, more detailed work is documented in what they call technical stories. Then the team must, estimate the velocity. How fast is each sprint going to take? So here you get you get a Gantt chart of using the Scrum approach. Now you can see smaller activities. Even though my project duration may be the same, I've got a whole lot more, sprint 1, sprint 2, sprint 3. I've got a whole lot more activities before I get back to, the closing of the project. Now, this backlog between product and sprint, on the product side, you're looking at, you got these stories, what you want to have done. I've got, as you can tell, most of the same thing. So on the product side and on the print side, all of these are identical. I've got work breakdown structures. I've got a project schedule, sample need to be done. I need to be able to charge the customers, for some of their services. But then things that are done on the product side that are not done on the sprint side are more on the business side. Business case, who's the point person, who's the, ask the expert feature, who's the stakeholders, So there's a lot more things across the whole product are a little bit different. But as you can tell that when it comes to the project execution side, what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, the schedules, ability to build people, all that stuff comes into play. Now, executing, most time and money is spent executing projects. In the Agile approach, teams produce several iterations, and each one having a potential shippable product. So it's keeping that in mind that I'm just building a bunch of small little prototypes, or at least small little products that each one could be released. And of course, communications, on an Agile side, I'm meeting every morning. I'm meeting every day, and usually what I do is have a stand-up. It'd be 15 minutes. I didn't want anybody sitting down, get comfortable, get in, talk about what needs to be done, what's working, what's not working, and then move on. Now, in the main tools in monitoring and controlling the Scrum framework is the daily Scrum, and that's that meeting that's held each morning to communicate how things are going. And the sprint review is, I want to make sure is that within the sprint, looking at everything that's got to be done, how are we proceeding on that sprint level? And then that burn down chart just shows, hey, these are all the, perfectly to get through all the number of days we got on that first sprint. I got 20 days, 3 weeks, we're going to deliver this stuff. How fast am I going? Mathematically, we had, 200 work hours to commit, and if you spread them evenly, you end up at that slope. But the burn chart says, oops, I started slower, took longer, sped up, but eventually caught up. So it just gives you a way of tracking how you're doing each one of those items. As far as the closing is concerned, you got a sprint review. Scrum Master, leads a sprint retrospective. And then the sprint retrospective basically is intended to says what went well in the last sprint. So what should we continue to do? And what could we do differently to improve the product? So it's really just kind of keeping an eye on how we're doing. Let's keep doing what we're doing right, and let's change what we're not. Now, there's several templates. You can go ahead and, go out to the author's website to take a look at it. Now, you guys are thinking about a project management career, or at least working with project managers. There's different ask your management which processes you're using. Ask your boss, coworkers, other colleagues, are there templates I should be following, making sure that I'm submitting software correctly, getting software correctly. Is there who do I have to report to? How do I have to report to? So there's some templates that can help you go through this. So in this project, you talk about the 5 project management process groups: initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, and closing. And then you map those to the knowledge areas. But we also looked at a couple of different product management. So we did, kind of the predictive stuff, and we also did the Scrum version. So I hope this gives you a rough idea on the process groups. And then the rest of the semester, we'll be going through each of the knowledge areas in more detail. If you have any questions, let me know.